switching roles, investor, operator.
My name is Malek NASR. I'm a co-founder and vice president at HighLife Medical. And HighLife is a company that makes transcatheter mitral valves. So we're in the cardiovascular business. Very happy to be here and to moderate this panel with Ken. What we can start with is maybe each one of you guys can give the audience a brief explanation about your activity, and then we can take it from there. Maybe we start with you, David.
Okay. Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm David MOREAU. I work at BNP Paribas Développement, which is an autonomous subsidiary of BNP, which is one of the largest banks in Europe. And so we invest in MedTech and digital health company at early stage and Series A stage. What else? I will explain you more after.
Hi, Mike Wallace. I'm a venture partner at ShangBay Capital in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm also still on the operating side, a co-founder in a women's health company called Early Bird Medical. Nice to be here.
Hello, I am Sanchita. I work for Sagana Capital. We're a global specialist investment advisory firm. We invest across human and planetary health. I work on the healthcare side, across life cycle of a company, so from early stage to late stage and globally, so both US, Europe, but also India and Southeast Asia.
I'm Omid AKHAVAN, Managing Director at Anthro Ventures, also CEO of Euphrates Vascular. At Anthro, we invest in clinical through commercial stage MedTech, health tech companies.
I'm Catello SOMMA. I'm a former TVM Capital investor based in Germany, investing in both biotech and medtech globally. I'm about to launch a new fund in a few weeks and continuing with the same kind of scope but at a different stage. So nice to meet you.
I'm Ken NELSON, partner in MedTech Advantage Fund. MedTech Advantage Fund is investing exclusively in MedTech Innovator alumni companies. MedTech Innovator is the largest MedTech and digital health startup accelerator globally. Prior to that, I was Chief Commercial Officer for Barty Diagnostics, which got acquired by Hillrom. Prior to that, led all commercial efforts for a company called Biotelemetry, which eventually got acquired by Philips. And then prior to that, led all commercial efforts for a startup called iRhythm, which eventually went public. So all in the cardiac patch, digital health, remote patient monitoring space. And now, also an angel investor involved in a handful of different accelerators, Health Wildcatters out of Dallas, Digital Health Hub out of San Francisco, and then MedTech Innovator out of LA. So happy to be here and excited to kind of talk about both sides of the equation as an operator and as an investor. And even like now as a board member, trying to help companies with figuring out their commercial efforts, it's a little bit different lens.
And as we said, what's special about our panelists today is that they switched the roles. So they know both sides. They have been operators and became investors, or vice versa. I think most of them have been operators then investors, except Omid. So Omid, this is why we're going to start with you. All right. And maybe tell us about the journey and what made you switch from an investor to an operator. What was the inflection point? Tell us how it went and what made you do this change in your career.
Sure. So I invested in Euphrates Vascular in 2020. I was chairman of the board, and I really believe in our vision as a company focused on neurovascular, specifically in acute ischemic stroke. And I was chairman on the board, engaged obviously on a quarterly basis at the board level, but also more involved strategically in the company. And basically last year, almost a year ago now, I got a call from my CEO telling me that he was leaving to take another job. And looking around in the company, there was really nobody to step in as CEO. spoke to a few recruiters, and they said, take at least 6 to 9 months to fill the role between, the recruiting process, hiring, getting them transitioned in, and then even then it would be a 3 to 6 month timeline to get them, ingrained in the business. And so I had a choice to make as, lead investor, own a lot of the company, either try and bring someone in from the outside or step in and fill those shoes. And so it wasn't by choice. So far it's been great. I've been almost a year full-time in the seat, and I've been learning a lot of things that you take for granted as an investor, of what hardships entrepreneurs actually go through in terms of living the life, dealing with employees, financing, clinical studies, regulatory reimbursement. I mean, MedTech is very complex, and so I definitely have a newfound appreciation and admiration for other entrepreneurs.
So it's mainly circumstances in your case that made you take the role because you had to, and it was a good switch for you.
Definitely.
Yeah. And what about you, David? I think you went the opposite way. You were very hands-on, an engineer.
Yes.
Then
exactly.
how did things happen?
So historically, I've been an R&D engineer for half a dozen years, and I was still in contact with my PhD advisor that was developing artificial ligament and tendon. And at some point, he had sufficient preclinical result to see something like that we could do a spin-off from the university. And so I decided to quit my job and start this journey with him for a year and a half. And as we were preparing our first fundraising with business angels, we obtained a second set of preclinical results that were insufficient. And at this point in time, I told myself it's going to be a long journey, and with that kind of results, the foundation are not solid enough to really create and incorporate the company, despite the fact that most of the business angels were telling me, yes, let's go. I said, no, because I've been on the other side before, and I know what it takes and what it costs, and I don't want to bring you into that. And actually, one of the BAs is at our investment committee, and he just, told me, what do you want to do now? And I told him I really appreciate the working on investment strategy, just strategy of companies. And he said, okay, maybe we are looking for someone at BNP who has an engineering background. So this is how I ended up at BNP.
Okay, you met the right people at the right time, basically.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And what about you, Michael? Do you want to tell us what was your inflection point where you moved from an operator to an investor?
Yeah, so most of my career I've been an operator, and I've just been an investor for the last year and a half. So I'm a fresh, brand new investor in a lot of ways, green behind the ears. So in my case, I worked in corporate America, Boston Scientific for about 10 years, then spent 10 years in different startup companies in the management team, and then the last 10 years I've been developing my own companies. But most recently, the reason I made the transition to being an investor is my last company, Devora Medical. We had a nice big exit with Boston Scientific, and one of the early investors, ShangBay Capital, asked me to help them join the group to help them vet opportunities. And obviously, there's a lot of synergies between an experienced entrepreneur and an investor, in the sense that a lot of the domain expertise that you get in starting companies and running companies, you can use some of that expertise to help vet and identify good opportunities to invest in.
Maybe, Sanchita, we can also hear your side of the story. How did things go for you?
Yeah, I also come from the corporate side. So let's say I'm a pharmacist by training. I spent the bulk of my career in Abbott, in their cardiovascular business. I started from the field, so working closely with physicians on using the medical devices in the cath lab, in the operating room. And then the last years I spent in Brussels at the European headquarters doing product management. I'd say the inflection point at that point was working with Abbott Ventures, so I led a couple of exclusive distribution agreements that gave me an insight onto what the ventures teams do in a corporate, but also what the entrepreneurs face when they are integrated. So I worked both on the integration and the commercialization. And I think that's where I understood that I really enjoyed that part. It was really fun to look at a company from all perspectives. And as a product manager, you're kind of jack of all trades because you're sitting, as you were saying before, in the middle of R&D, regulatory, reimbursement, sales, and having had that perspective of working closely with customers and seeing the impact on patients, I saw an opportunity to sort of dive on the other side and be able to work with multiple companies as an investor instead of just working with one. So that was when I realized that, ventures was where I wanted to work.
You're pointing out the fact that as an investor, you actually have multiple projects you're working on compared to just one focus, which was something we're going to discuss a bit later also in terms of differences between both roles. Catello, your turn. We want to hear your story.
Yep. So in fact, I had a bit of a long journey to become a VC, okay? So that happened after 15 years of work in the industry. So which industry? That's the first question, right? So I'm a biologist by training, right? And I was developing oncology drugs. And then, then I took an MBA and I switched into corporate restructuring, for MedTech, biotechs, and repackaging companies. So everything related to life science. So CDMO, you can call, right? But then I always had this idea to this entrepreneurial spirit, let's put it that way, right? So out of a paper on Nature, right, I spotted something that could have become a kind of combo play for a standard of care, no? And after, 40, 50 kind of interactions with VCs, I got financed in Boston, so the company has been created in Boston, with a team of 5 people, me included. So, actually that went sold 2 years ago to another biotech. In the meantime, I joined TVM Capital because I was really excited to learn more about the investment side, right? I've been exposed to the board dynamic, to demystify a bit this kind of secret club, right? What that means investing, their logic and so on. So, and the thesis. So, given that the TVM had this deep scientific angle, right? I was welcomed to the team. And it was not just for biotech, but also for the MedTech strategy. And from the get-go, I had to manage deals that were already commercial stage, $1 million in pilot sales, right, with ticket size of 20 to 25 million. So, that has been a very strong and intense training on the job for me, to say. And I treasure it every moment. There have been a lot of ups and downs, as you can imagine, right? But then that resulted to have investments approved, right? And sitting on the boards of both biotech and medtechs. And this is where I am today here, right?
Right, and Ken, I think we also want to hear your...
Yeah, so I think, like probably everybody on stage, everybody in the room, I feel strongly that your experiences shape you. And for me, I've had a couple different inflection points. I think one of the first major ones for me, I was in corporate finance coming out of college. And for those of you who lived in New York or from New York or grew up in that area like I did, 9/11 was a very impactful event. And knew people that died in the towers, knew firemen that died in the towers, et cetera. And when that happened, I decided to completely change my mindset on what I wanted to do career-wise. And I shifted from corporate finance to wanting to get into cardiac devices. And when I found out what an implantable pacemaker did, an implantable defibrillator, I got somewhat obsessed with wanting to get into those procedures and be a part of those procedures. And so I put a plan together to get into one of those companies and get into sales, even though I had no sales experience. And so that was kind of the first major inflection point for me, is to completely shift and get into cardiac devices. So that was 2001. And I got in with Guidant, which then got acquired by Boston Scientific, kind of worked my way up that way. And then was lucky enough to be a part of building the teams, the cultures, the infrastructures of 3 different companies that had eventual successful exits. And I think by the third one, I really started to want to get back into the VC world, which is tough to do. It's not easy to go from an operator into the VC world. But I kept thinking I wanted to do it. And then after I went through an accelerator through MedTech Innovator, and I got to know Paul Grand and kind of talked about what they were doing with that accelerator, I got so much out of the accelerator that I said, you know, you should really have a venture fund that invests in the companies coming out of MedTech Innovator. So we talked about it for a couple years. Barty eventually sold. And then I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And so I kind of started a division for Biotronic, one of the bigger pacemaker companies. Terrible idea going back to a big company after a couple startups in a row. So I learned my lesson there. And I talked to Paul and said, hey, let's start this venture fund. And so I quit that job, you know, very comfortable job at a big device company, to join a handful of boards and start a venture fund. So kind of a scary thing to do, but I'm excited about it and taking that journey with, sounds like a number of you on stage here.
So very different experiences. Each one of you had made the switch for different reasons or different circumstances. As you said, Ken, many people want to do this change, and I'm sure in the audience some people are interested in this. What does it take to move from one role to the other? What are the main differences that you see from your experience when you were an operator and became an investor, or the opposite for you, Omid? Can you tell us more about it?
I think part of it's just taking that risk. I mean, as an operator of a startup, you're taking calculated risks and making that shift from being an operator to get into the venture world. It's again about taking that risk. But if you're excited enough about it and you have that perseverance and passion, then it's worth doing. And for me, I wanted to be able to help more than just one company. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to get into this, is to be able to help a handful of companies that I'm extremely passionate about versus just focusing all my efforts in one company. So for me, I feel like that's at least my perspective on that.
I'd say one fundamental aspect as I was trying to explore that world was realizing that a lot of investors that I was speaking to in the VC world didn't have that operational experience in-house. And if you look at what an investor has to do, right, there's 2 parts of the job. There's, you know, pre-investment and post-investment. You have to have that kind of judgment before to see, you know, if something would work or not in the real world. And that comes from experience. There's so many good ideas out there, so many great entrepreneurs out there, but if MedTech is one of those worlds where if you don't have that experience, it's really hard to get that experience. So the judgment from an operational background is something that I realized a lot of VCs told me as I was exploring it, but it's also post-investment, right? You are working with these entrepreneurs and you want to be their first person they call, if that makes sense, right? Like, you don't want to be the person that is, you know, it's about letting them do what they know how to do best. It's not doing the job for them, but it's being, you know, bringing in value. And how do you bring in value at a board level, or, you know, when you talk to a founder, if you don't understand his or her challenges and haven't seen enough to be like, okay, this is the way you could solve it, this is the way you could solve it. And so it's actually being a partner post-investment. I think that's what the key skills you learn as an operator.
I also think it's easier for us to appreciate the importance of people and culture in an organization. And when an investor hasn't been an operator and they're telling you about the culture and you're just thinking, you don't know how difficult it is to hire people and build a culture within a startup and keep them there. But us as operators who are now investors, I just feel like we appreciate it that much more, and the difficulty of, if you make a mistake, it can really hurt you. especially when you only have a couple people on the team and you're building that culture that you want within that organization. I just feel like we get it a little bit better having to do it for a startup versus an investor who hasn't been an operator. Do you all agree with that or have different perspectives on that?
Absolutely.
Well, I have a slight different point of view here because, in fact, when you become an investor, you sit on the board and your mantra is the kind of reshaping the strategy, right? And this is cascaded down to the culture, you know, the team spirits, and then the kind of focus on the execution. Right? So for that reason, let's say I see complementarity here rather than more a kind of a seamless touch between the kind of two roles. And this has been a kind of transition for me that made me, you know, a kind of wow at some point, right? The other certainly is the definition of success, no? So, I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, what that means for you? That you have the best product, you launch the best product of the market that is addressing the people, the huge need and helping people, right, to live better, basically. But on top to that, the investor, as you know, has the exit in mind. How can you make this transactable, right? So when and for which multiples? And then you reverse engineer. So I think that switching the role is helping to add this layer on top, right? And the people that are then part of your portfolio company moving forward will benefit from your learnings in that sense.
I think I'd add something else, is that as I think about being an investor, your job is to think about trends over the next 3, 5, 10 years, identify kind of the next big set of opportunities, and then just kind of filter out different ideas and try and find companies and technologies that you think will be successful. And so I find as an investor, you have periods of high intensity of activity where either you're doing diligence on a deal or you're going to a bunch of conferences, and then you're kind of sifting through and you're reflecting and you're thinking. On the flip side, I think as an operator, I mean, yes, you have periods of intense activity, but I think your level of activity is very stable. And to be a successful entrepreneur requires consistency, is that you always have to respond to your emails. You have to, you have your weekly meetings with your team, with your advisors. You have your quarterly board meetings. You're responsible for, accomplishing a series of tasks that it's a seemingly never-ending list of tasks that you have to execute on. Whereas as an investor, it's really like when you find that deal that you need and you're kind of going on the hunt and you're trying to get it done, then you're going through this checklist of, do the diligence calls and things like that. So I see some minor differences between the two roles in terms of just level of activity and focus, right? Because as an entrepreneur, you're focused on one thing intensely and it's every aspect. It's almost like a PhD in whatever that startup is trying to achieve, whereas as an investor, you need to be kind of a much higher level across multiple subsectors and opportunities.
Yeah, and I think you describing, I mean, the roles are really different, all right? I mean, they are drastically different, I think, between an investor and an operator. And in a lot of ways, being an investor intellectually is a lot more exciting. You get to meet a lot of cool, smart people. You get to hear people, present, new diseases, new markets. I mean, it's super. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's really it's super exciting being on the other side of it, hearing all these opportunities. And then, of course, you're going to do a deal. Then you have to put some work in as an investor, right? So then you got to go do the due diligence, try to understand the market. But intellectually, I actually think it's a lot more interesting than running a company. Running a company, I also think, is a lot harder. But I think that the exciting part about running a company is all that effort that you put into it. When it works out, it feels that much more special, right? And I think our parents even told us that when we were growing up. When the harder you have to work for something, the more you appreciate it at the end. But they are really different roles. The synergies between the two, or the similarities between them, is I think we developed this expertise in our domain expertise in general in these life science applications. And you get this ability to kind of, if you're a CEO, you have to have enough confidence or know-how to kind of work your way from A to Z, right? And so you have ability to problem solve. And I think it's similar with being an investor. You then are trying to use that same skill set you use to get from A to Z, but you're just applying your acumen in a slightly different way.
I think it's all about risk mitigation, right? I mean, where the roles are similar is your job is to mitigate risk. And so as an investor, you have to identify those risks and then back the teams that you believe can actually, knock out those risks. And as an entrepreneur, you're constantly looking at, what is my regulatory risk? I got to get the experts in to help me. So I think that's where there's a common vision. It's all about risk mitigation to get to success, whatever that means for either the investor or the entrepreneur.
I think one critical element here is the execution piece on the risk. How you identify risk, and then what do you do about it? The entrepreneur, I think, problem solving, you mentioned it, I think that's ultimately what, you're firing across, I don't know how many bombs a day, right? That's what a CEO is doing every day. You have people coming to you with problems, customers coming to you with problems, and you have to find a way to solve them. Now, if you're an early stage company, you don't have many people that can do that for you. But if you have a bigger company, it's about, learning that balance of you're in the world, you're right in the world, right? So the entrepreneur sees that every day. On the investor side, I'd say I do miss executing sometimes. I do miss talking to customers. I do miss being on the field and seeing the real world. I think that's sometimes, just not going against investors, but something to keep in mind as we speak to entrepreneurs, that you're the ones actually, solving the problems. We're the ones to maybe be a sounding board or give some insight or share, what other companies are doing, what's happening in the market. But ultimately, there's no execution apart from being on a computer and, writing a 50-page memo and then, going to board meetings. So I think on the execution, that's where, it comes in on what investors look at as well. It's really being able to solve those problems, and you guys face that on an everyday basis. So just to,
So
as an investor.
one of the things that I'm really surprised at is some of the VCs that don't have members that are former operators, when they're evaluating the company, isn't all, but some of them that I've worked with, they don't spend nearly as much time on the people. They evaluate everything else. They may spend, they're going to spend time with the CEO, founder, but the rest of the team, they a lot of times spend little to no time with, which as an operator really surprises me, because for me, I feel like people and culture are like the magic ingredient. It can be the best product in the world. If they don't have the right people, they're not building the right culture. It's not going to be successful. Yet so many VC groups don't take the time and effort to spend time with the other people on the C-suite or dig into the weeds on the sales team. Like go spend time with a customer and see how the sales team operates and what their messaging is. And so I don't know if any of you have kind of really looked at that. And then just to add to that even further, when we were raising Series B at the last company I was with, we were having trouble getting a lead investor. And I just couldn't get it through my head why they weren't going and talking to the other people. So I actually reached out to one of the VCs and said, hey, would you come to this conference and meet some customers with us? And I'd love for you to come to dinner with the sales team. And that ended up being the lead investor in Series B. But I think part of my point is, as operators, I feel like we're so people-focused that we think that way. And I can't imagine the VCs that don't have a former operator on the team because they just don't spend enough time with the team.
I mean, you're right. I can give you a clear example. In fact, this is exactly what happened also to one of my previous companies, right? Where at the beginning there was a bit of skepticism because, in fact, you see on paper during your due diligence, you say, okay, this is an hub spoke. You go with the direct sales in this hub but in North America you have a different approach. In Europe, the same. But you really don't feel the nuances and the difference that the sales team can bring to the table. And in fact, actually, this is something that the CEO has to have in mind crystal clear. So to push a bit the boundaries and say, guys, in addition to what you see on the Excel spreadsheets, right, and the interviews with customers, so let's bring on board the point of view of the sales team to see how motivated they are. What is behind the pipeline that they are bringing together in order for you to judge if this is a good investment or not? I think that's a kind of turning point. You're right. I mean, sometimes big funds don't have enough time to go that deep, right? So it's the role of the operator to pull this up to them, right?
It's one of those things that we wouldn't necessarily have thought of, but we're having so much trouble that we said, let's be proactive and pull them in. And it sounds like it worked for you guys too, but we did it through trial and error.
A very interesting topic. I was going to actually ask a question about it. Maybe, David, how much do you think an investor should be digging into the team structure of a company? Like, what's the limit? Do you limit yourself to C-level? Do you go into the sales team? What do you think is reasonable to do?
I think the team is the blood of the company. This is what we think. It's for us, it's 90%, 99%, and you put the rest in the other percent of the company, of the case. So from our perspective, we are pretty old school. We go within the company. We want to see not everyone, but almost, the C-levels, the head of the different operation. How do they interact together? It's very important for us. I think that's the blood life of the company. And especially for us as we invest in early and Series A company where you have like sometimes an MVP, but like preclinical result, first in man, the whole rest is going to rely on the team and how they are going to execute. And I think, yes, it's really important to dig in all of that.
I'd add, we at Sagana, we have our own talent team, so we have the capital side and talent, and that's about 50% of the job. Our assessment of the team goes at various levels. I'd say we apply, on the company culture, I think there's so much to dig in, and I think my talent partners would do a much better job than me in describing what they do, but it's really just going beyond the culture and building the people practices and assessing if a company has, especially if the entrepreneur has that intentionality of even knowing what company culture is, why is it important. We do come in to help our portfolio companies build that company culture, but we look at multiple layers across the company, across different, let's say, fields of intentionality. What is their, will they bail at the first, what ESOP they've built in, like how are they incentivize their employees. So there's so many layers to looking at a company culture.
And do you guys think that, Mike, this question for you, do you think that the fact that you've been an operator makes you as an investor more hands-on?
Yeah, I think, you can. I mean, if you're an operating person that's become an investor and you're sitting on the board, obviously it's going to be a lot more natural for you to understand and appreciate the challenges and the problems of the company. But going back to the culture point, I mean, in my experience, at least on the early stage companies, the CEO decides 90% of the culture in the company. Now, as the companies become more mature, B, C, and D rounds, of course, it's way more diverse. But at the beginning, you don't have to go very far. You just start with that CEO, and you can look and see how he or she and the management team are how they behave, what their reputations are like. But I mean, they have tremendous power and influence, obviously. And so that's really where you need to focus.
Now, a lot of people listening to us actually might want to become investors, might want to become operators. From your perspective, and everybody now is fundraising. So this is a topic that always comes up. As investors, and also, Omid, you've been in that role, so you should share also your thoughts about it. What do you expect from operators today? When they come, they pitch, they talk to you, what do you expect? What are your expectations?
That what we need, and having been on the other side, it's to accommodate to the operator and understand their timeline. And something that pissed off the investor is that operator don't, or miss the timeline that they have set at the beginning. And so for us, it's really to work with them on the timeline and make sure they get it.
Which is what usually happens.
Usually is that you underestimate the work that has to be done. You underestimate how much it's going to cost, and when it's the time, you need a bridge and you are on a very bad position. So the good thing is to really work with the operator and really understand their pace, and you have to accommodate to them.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else on what you expect from operators?
I think, so I've probably heard a couple thousand pitches over the last, 7, 8 years. And one of the things that I think a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate is the knowledge and cross-knowledge that an investor might have. So, for example, they come in, so generally what I love about being an investor is that entrepreneurs are the experts in what they're doing. They are very deep, they're PhDs in that specific area. But sometimes they kind of lose sight of the forest in general, and they're not looking outside and seeing competition. And so I've had situations where, I've done diligence on 3 other companies in this space. So I ask a very basic question, and they don't know the answer, and then they try to wing it, instead of saying, hey, you know what, I don't really know the answer. I've gathered what I think the answer is based on the other conversations I've had, and then they kind of try and fumble through it and make something up, and that's a huge, as an investor, a huge turnoff. But I've also had situations where it's the opposite. Is I ask a question, and the entrepreneur says, I don't know, let me get back to you. And literally 2 days later, they come back to me with an email. And I respect that. And so I think, ultimately as an investor, you're putting your money, your time, your reputation into a company, and you're backing an entrepreneur and a team. And so you are family. And I think the way that I think about investing is you have to be honest and transparent as an entrepreneur to an investor in terms of okay, what's going well, what is not going well. Because at the end of the day, if you try and hide things, issues can spiral out of control, and then your investors can't help you, right? Your board can't help you. And so I think, and that honesty begins at that first meeting, that first pitch, where an investor asks you a question, I think you have to be honest and truthful of what's working, because that honesty resonates and carries throughout the relationship, and I think that trumps all.
So to build on that, I agree with what you said. I mean, my expectations for an operator nowadays, where we are living a kind of downturn, right? I mean, that's the reality. So 3 things. The first one, be factual. So come with the facts. So that's the business case. This is how you can develop. Then you build on board, you bring on board your own perspective, because you have your experience, serial entrepreneur, you have a specific angle on how you can turn this into a success. And the third, be prepared for the worst case scenario, right? Because you may be short on cash, you may revise your ambition and develop a different trajectory at some point, right? So,
should we open up Q&A? We got about 8 minutes left. I always like to leave some time for questions. I know we can talk, and maybe we're talking about the stuff that you all want to hear, but we'll open it up to questions. Unless, Malek, did you have anything else you wanted to ask before we open it up?
Any questions? No? Okay.
In anyone's opinion, when you make that transition from being an operator to an investor, and I think Mike even alluded to it a little bit, but do you miss being an operator so much where the whole novelty of seeing a bunch of new projects over a vast amount of pitch decks gets a little bit old and you wish you can go back to executing? Or do you not mind sitting on that?
I mean, I can tell you right now, I'm on a half dozen boards, and a couple of the technologies are so incredible that as they get ready to launch, I would consider going back and commercializing them, just because they're that disruptive. Even though I told myself and told my wife I wouldn't go back and do it again, you get excited about something else, and you're like, all right, I could see myself going and building a team around it. And then people that I've worked with in the past have said, there's no way you can stay out of not building another company. And I think we all get so passionate about stuff that we all think about it. I don't know if we'll actually go do it, but I could see myself maybe going and doing one more.
Yeah,
maybe
Giovanni, it's a great question. The analogy is, if you look at professional football coaches in the U.S., right? That's like one of the hardest jobs in the world. Professional football in Europe too, different sport, and then they become TV analysts, right? And they're sitting there laughing and stuff, and it's probably not as rewarding. But how often do the TV analysts go back and become head coaches? Not very often. And the reason why is it's crazy stressful running a company. It's crazy more stressful running a company than it is being an investor. Not to say that investing is not hard. I think the hard part of investing, of course, is picking the darn right investment so that your fund does well and you can live on. But it is really hard. So personally, I'm right in that tweener stage where I'm still an operator still, and I have those discussions with my wife all the time. Am I going to go back and run a next company? And she has to remind me of how I wasn't happy all of the time when I was running the company. And, be very selective if you do go back and run another one.
Honestly, I'd only do it if she was okay with it, because I've told her that. I'm like, you get the final say on this. Because we don't know, we forget.
It's always about the partnership, isn't it? So,
No,
fund or family, it's always a partnership, isn't it? Okay.
Having been in an operator, so it was interesting because my journey to venture was a very non-traditional one. I didn't work in startups. I didn't work in banking. Engineer by training, but started in management consulting and then went into industry, did strategy, biz dev, and then made the crossover. And I look, now that I'm an operator, I know exactly why I went into investing. And had it not been circumstantial, I don't know that I would want to be an operator. I think for a lot of the reasons stated is that it's a very hard job, and you're always on. At the end of the day, everything falls on your shoulders. As an investor, nobody likes to talk about this, and they've talked a little bit about portfolio management, but that startup is one of 10 or 15 in the portfolio, and so if that one doesn't work, well, you have 9 or 14 other ones that you can invest more heavily on to make up for your losses. Whereas as an entrepreneur, it's you are betting your time, your reputation on that one thing. And so it's a lot of pressure, and you have to make it successful. And so I think you go above and beyond, at least successful entrepreneurs go above and beyond. And then to the other panels, like hopefully you get lucky, right? And as everyone knows, the old adage, luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And so you have to be prepared, you have to put in the time, you have to do the work, and hopefully the opportunity comes for you to exit.
But isn't it more, I miss it, honestly, to answer. I miss the rewarding piece of it. You're actually seeing the impact of something, and I miss that. I miss going back at the cat labs and talking to customers, and but I don't miss the sales targets. I don't miss.
But you can do that as an investor.
Exactly. That's why I'm not going back.
As chairman, I went to all the clinical studies even before I invested. I was sitting with strategics, in conferences with the CEO before I invested to hear the feedback and do all that. So you could be as involved as you want or as not, as an investor.
I definitely don't miss the quarterly and the monthly sales targets and the market share targets and the pressure of, short term. I don't miss that, but
the funnest part of operating a company is building the team and running the team and the group of people. You're the head coach, you're the captain of the team, and that's the part that's super special when you can lead the team to victory. And that doesn't always happen either, right? But that is the coolest part.
Okay, so it seems like you guys don't really want to go back to an operational role. You think it's nice for the adventure, but you're happy where you are.
Ask me again in 5 years.
Yes. Yeah, Giovanni.
For you, because you're the operator and still the operator on the panel here right now. So everyone else has made the transition.
Yes.
Have they convinced you to want to join venture, or are you going to go do another startup?
Look, I think, as some of them said, sometimes it's a natural transition. Like you exit or you meet the right people. So for us at HighLife, we're totally hands-on right now, running the clinical study all over the world, basically. So I don't think about it so much, but it's somewhere on one side of my thoughts, my brain, and nothing surprising in what you guys said. It convinced me that you did the right switch. So we'll see. But any other questions maybe from the audience? All right. Well, thank you for sharing with us what you expect from people raising funds today. I think that was very useful. And also about the differences between both jobs. And thank you very much. Thank you for listening.